follows him on LinkedIn. He's an incredibly sort of transparent, sort of empathetic individual. It strikes me that some of the other leaders that you've worked, he's very distinct from some of the other leaders that you've worked with, Larry Ellison, Elon Musk. And if there's anything I think about this a lot, if there's anything we can learn from this sort of set of examples, and you were lucky enough to work for those three and others, is that there's no kind of one particular formula to be a great leader. There's lots of successful leaders who take very, very different approaches. It causes me pause. We really spend a lot of money on leadership training, and I wonder can we really teach it, or is it just something you're born with and you bring your own style to the table?
Way to ask me the tough question on this one. I mean, listen, yes, I do think that you can teach leadership. I believe that to the core of my soul. I do understand the point that you're making, and I do think that ultimately, if there's one thing that we're truly learning from the behavioral sciences right now, as cliched or as old-fashioned as it might sound, one of the key learnings we're having is the power of role modeling. And I almost hate saying that out loud, but all of the best social scientists out there right now, that the power of having a great role model, having somebody show you what good leadership looks like, has a profound impact on people's leadership style. So it's the kind of sort of the proverbial monkey see, monkey do. And so what is difficult is when you have senior leaders in a company acting one way and you have junior leaders being sent to leadership development courses, and what you're teaching them and asking them to do is nothing like the leadership that they see on a day-to-day basis. And I really do believe that that is in many ways the root cause of where some of the leadership development efforts fall short. There's one of two. That's one. Can I give you the second one?
Please do.
All right. This one's a little bit controversial. I would love to have some people that listen to this podcast that would like to kick around this idea with me a little bit. The second thing I really truly believe holds back leadership development today is that leadership development in many ways today has become somewhere between a popularity contest and a self-help exercise. And there's good reason for this. It's not all negative within itself. I think that there's a premium now in a lot of companies around not being a jerk leader, and that's a very positive thing. But take it to an extreme, you see a lot of effort being put into employee opinion surveys, people getting feedback. You see managers and leaders starting to make decisions not from a leadership standpoint, but from the standpoint of wanting to be liked, or wanting to be getting good scores on an employee opinion surveys. And I don't know that I believe that that's what leadership is. I don't think it's an excuse to be a jerk. And I think that, if you're a good leader, you will bring out the best of your people. But sometimes that means challenging. Sometimes that means making a hard decision. And I'm just not seeing as much of that in leadership and leadership development offerings as I'd like to see. And so these are sort of kind of the two things I think make it a little problematic in my mind. But having said that, though, I still deeply believe that we can teach leadership skills, and ultimately companies, I think, have an obligation to do so.
Got it. Just in that back to you, then. I think you're saying that this sort of cult of, or this current focus on employee engagement may be exacerbated by where we are in this sort of employment cycle, maybe the result of certain companies who are trying hard to attract and retain very expensive talent may actually be sort of changing the leadership styles that are in vogue. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's something like that. And like I said, there's a lot of good reasons for, and positives that would come out of this. So, again, this mantra of like, you cannot be a raging jerk anymore. You and I grew up in an area, and we've worked in companies where it was totally okay to be that way if you achieve exceptional results. I don't believe that that's the norm in a lot of companies today. I think people are realizing that that's not the right way to behave. You don't get the best performance doing that, nor do you keep the best talent. So there's all kinds of good reasons to do it. My comment is, though, taken to an extreme and without people having a critical eye on it, it's very easy to fall into a leadership mantra of likability, popularity. What was my employee opinion surveys? Which is sometimes when I look at my managers, there's some managers who I wish had higher scores on their employee opinion surveys. And sometimes I can look at a manager and say, you know what? I'd actually think your scores need to come down a little bit. I'm not sure you're having the tough conversations that you need to be having to help your people grow and do extraordinary things.
I've been thinking a lot about just what we spend on leadership training, and I truly believe it can be taught, and I truly believe that anyone can become a better leader, and everybody should strive to do that. But it's a massive percentage of the L&D spend goes on leadership, and yet we still have all these issues around inclusivity or lack of it, gender balance or lack
Mm,
of it. We've had sort of
mm,
plateauing productivity over the last 10 years, despite all this new technology that's
mm-hmm,
come to market. And now we have workforces that essentially don't have leaders. Like if you think about self-employed people, the solopreneurs, as they're called, Airbnb hosts, Lyft drivers, the gig economy, you've got an entire workforce that doesn't have a middle management layer or even a senior leader layer. Do you think we might be just over investing in leaders? Shouldn't we shift our attention to individuals more? I ask you this, Ben, because nobody I know has spent more time on leadership and worked for such extraordinary leaders, and I'm genuinely interested whether we maybe need to shift the balance.
I appreciated that. Thank you for that. I have a big smile on my face right now. That got a giggle out of me. I'm not sure if it was nervous laughter or what it was, but you definitely got a giggle out of me on that one. Um, I mean, listen, it's two ways you could frame this. On one hand, we could certainly look at it and say that the reason that we focus on this is it's in theory a leveraged use of time and money. That by reaching one
Hmm.
great leader, you reach X, Y, Z number of employees. That in many ways our leaders are where our strategies come to live or die, culture comes to live or die, retention either goes up or down. There's a lot of really compelling reasons why you would focus your spend and your resources there, so given the potential for leverage on that. Now, having said that, I think it's a very fair critique and a fair question that you're asking. And as much as I would hate to admit this, I think that if companies around the world really were able to accurately do an ROI analysis on the leadership development spend they've made in the last 10 years, I'd be hard pressed to think many companies would be wholly satisfied with that ROI on that. So it is a fair question. The I'll stand by my point that I always think that leadership will be needed. I think the definition of it will change. I don't think it necessarily will come from an org chart to your standpoint, but I think that leadership will always have a place in the way that we work. And it could be leadership of
Yeah.
peers. It could be this social leadership, which is different than what we've known in the past. But I see the ongoing need for that. Now, if you said, but maybe we focus on the individual a little bit more, the place that I have a little bit of a hiccup and a thought about the future is I really do believe that the biggest talent question facing companies will in the next 3, 4, maybe 5 years at the most will be the reskilling and retraining of their existing workforces. And I do think that the size of that lift will be so massive that it will force companies to have to make some difficult decisions and trade-offs about where they focus their time and money. And if there was ever a candidate to assume the kind of the role of most of the focus of L&D, if there was one to knock leadership off the perch, for me, it really would be around the reskilling and retraining of your current workforce.
Very interesting. So, what obviously this is kind of front and center of the conversation for the Learning Futures group is how is the workplace going to change, and what's our role as L&D professionals in driving that. You worked at some extraordinary companies. Which of those do you think has had the strongest learning culture, and what and why? I'm trying to get at a lot of people ask us, how do we build a better learning culture we don't know how to do that. We know how to run programs, we know how to bring in great content, but how do we build a learning culture? And if you reflect on the companies that you've worked at, Ben, all extraordinary companies, which had the strongest learning culture and why?
I mean, to some degree, I'm sorry for the cliched answer here. I mean, for some degree, I've had sort of four big companies that I've had the privilege of working at, all leaders in their space and have done amazing things. All of them, Oracle, The Gap, Tesla, LinkedIn,
Right.
I would say are all relatively good at it because they had to be good at it. So I'd first of all give credit to all four of the companies that I've worked at. If I had to pick between them, it would probably be somewhere between Tesla and LinkedIn, and for very different reasons. Tesla, because it's an innovation engine, and it's impossible to have innovation without having a learning culture. And they don't need to call it a learning culture to get it. They get it simply by the emphasis that they put on constant innovation, which in turn breeds a culture of learning. So that's a strategy to get it by focusing on something else. LinkedIn's different. LinkedIn definitely has a focus on learning. It helps that we have a learning business. It'd be a little bit hypocritical of us to sell learning as a core product and service and value add to our customers if we didn't embrace it ourselves. But you also have at LinkedIn a lot of senior executives that role model it. And I go back to that word again. I can't believe I've used it so many times in one podcast. I'll apologize to you later offline, but it makes an enormous impact when you have, for example, a CEO who constantly talks about learning. And what it is that he's learned and how he's investing in his learning. We've had a learning challenge at our all the executives at our company had a challenge out to the employees who can learn the most, take the most new courses, learn the most new things in a given period of time, and it set off a really friendly competition between all the different lines of businesses on who could demonstrate the most active learning within legal versus HR versus sales versus marketing, and you have those kinds of things that just really bring learning into the forefront of the conversation of the company. So in two different ways, both of those companies, great learning culture.
You've worked in, as you said, manufacturing, retail, technology, and you've been in talent roles and workplace learning related roles. What do you think about the future of learning? These are companies that people might associate with kind of at least the cutting edge of what's going on in the workplace. What do you think about the future of work?
I mean, future work, future learning. I'll just, I mean, on the future of learning, what I would say is that there's no better time to be in learning business than today. The bar across the board, in my opinion, is actually relatively low, but the need and the spotlight on it have never been higher. So if you've got a good background and you're willing to ask some good questions and do some good work, it's the ultimate sort of product to market match right now. The market needs better and more learning to help equip us for the future. And for those of the out there in the world that have a great learning background and can solve tough problems, it's a great time to be in our business. So really good on our professional side. Great time to be in it. And the good news is everybody's in the learning business now, and that's exciting to see. So from that side, amazing. Future of work, I mean, there's nothing I can probably add to this, Chris, that you probably don't have. People that are far more eloquent than I am that can add to this. But there's an enormous amount of opportunity out there. And then quite honestly, for me, there's also going to be quite an enormous amount of upheaval. And for those of us, again, in the learning space, learning is the key to help us through times of upheaval. So it is both a great opportunity, but quite an exceptional responsibility for all of us as well.
Last question for you, Ben. What inspired you to do the work that you do? Was there a particular person or an incident or some sort of observation that set you on the path you're on? It seems like you've been quite deliberate in how you put your career together. That may be wrong, but that's what it looks like from the outside. And I just wondered if there was something in particular that inspired you.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, both my parents are former educators. My father a professor, and my mother a school teacher. So quite interesting that I would be in the education space, and especially because if you would have asked my younger self, the one thing that I would never do, it would be to be a teacher.
Right.
And so somehow I do believe that there's an odd family thing working here that pulled me into the thing that I said I would never do, and somewhat follow in my parents' footsteps. So that I think that plays a role in it. But honestly, for me, it's really been mentorship more than anything. A little bit of serendipity, a little bit of